For the longest time, if you were an investor trying to figure out a company's real climate impact, well, good luck. You were basically flying blind. It was just this maze of different reports, confusing data, a total mess. But that's all changing. Seriously, we are right on the edge of a brand new era of transparency, and it's all thanks to one single global standard for climate reporting.
All right, so how did we get here? And more importantly, where are we headed? Here's the plan for breaking down this new standard, IFRS S2. First, we'll look at the chaos that came before. Then we'll get into the solution, dig into all the details, and wrap up by looking at why this is truly a game changer.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. To really get why this new standard is such a big deal, we have to understand just how fragmented and, well, confusing the world of climate reporting used to be.
Seriously, just try to imagine comparing two companies on their climate performance. It was less like comparing apples and oranges and more like comparing apples, oranges, bananas, and a dozen other fruits, all with completely different labels. Everybody had their own rule book. It created this ocean of inconsistent data, and for investors, it was just a massive headache.
And look, all these frameworks, they were started with the best intentions, right? They all wanted to create more transparency. But the thing is, having so many different ones created a brand new problem. You couldn't compare anything. It was a classic case of too many cooks in the kitchen, and the final dish was just a murky, unclear picture of a company's actual financial risk from climate change.
So what do? How do you possibly bring order to all that chaos? Well, a new group was formed, and they had one super clear mission.
Enter the IFRS Foundation. You might know them. They're the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation. These are the folks who gave us the global accounting standards that are used in like over 140 countries. So they know a thing or two about creating a universal language for business. And now, with their new board, the ISSB, that's the International Sustainability Standards Board, they're doing the exact same thing for sustainability. The goal is simple: create one common language for climate reporting that everyone, everywhere can finally understand.
And this really shows you the before and after. We're going from that messy, fragmented world with inconsistent data and confused investors to a single global baseline. What does that mean? It means clear, comparable data. And for investors, that is everything. It's a total game changer for transparency.
Okay, so how is this all structured? Well, the new standards, especially IFRS S2, which is all about climate, are built on these four core pillars. And hey, if you've ever worked with the TCFD framework, this is going to look super familiar because the ISSB basically built on their work. Let's break it down simply. Governance. Who's in charge of this stuff? Strategy. What's the overall game plan? Risk management. What's the playbook for dealing with risks? And finally, metrics and targets. How do you keep score?
All right, now we're getting to the heart of it. IFRS S2 itself. This isn't about making fuzzy promises about being greener. Nope. This is about disclosing the specific risks a company faces and doing it in a really structured, really transparent way.
So what exactly does the standard ask companies to report on? Well, it really boils down to two key types of climate risk. Let's dive into what those are.
First up, you've got physical risk. This is the stuff you see on the news, right? We're talking about the acute, sudden events. Think a massive hurricane taking out a factory or wildfires disrupting a supply chain. But it's also about the slow burn stuff, the chronic risks. Things like rising sea levels threatening coastal property over decades, or changing weather patterns that lead to persistent drought. Both the sudden shock and the slow creep can absolutely hammer a company's finances.
Okay, the second big category is transition risk. This is all about the risks that come from us moving to a lower carbon economy. So think about it. New laws, like a carbon tax, could suddenly make an old business model way too expensive. A competitor might roll out some amazing new clean technology that makes your products look ancient. Even customer tastes change. People might just stop buying from companies that aren't seen as green. And trust me, these risks can hit a company's wallet just as hard as a physical storm.
But here's a really important point. It's not all doom and gloom. The standard actually requires a balanced view. It pushes companies to also report on the opportunities that come with this transition. And there are tons. We're talking about creating new, more efficient products, tapping into new markets for green tech, or just building a stronger, more resilient supply chain. It's about looking for that upside.
So you've identified the risks, you've spotted the opportunities. What's next? Well, IFRS S2 doesn't stop there. It takes a huge step forward by requiring companies to set actual, concrete, measurable targets, and then report on how they're doing.
And we're not talking about some vague promise here. The standard demands real detail. It's asking, what is your target exactly? How are you measuring it? Which emissions are you counting? What's your baseline, your starting point? And when are you going to get it done? This level of detail is all about making climate action transparent and holding companies accountable.
So let's look at what that might actually look like. A company might say something like this. See how clear that is? It's specific, it's measurable. As an investor, you know exactly what they're trying to do, by when, and how they're keeping score. This is precisely the kind of clarity the market has been crying out for.
Now, when a company talks about covering its emissions, we need to get what scopes mean. It's pretty straightforward. Scope 1 is the pollution coming directly from stuff they own, like their factories or vehicles. Scope 2 is indirect. It's from the electricity they buy. And then there's Scope 3. This is the big one. It's all the other indirect emissions in their entire value chain, from the raw materials they get from suppliers all the way to how customers use their products. And yeah, as you can see, it's often the biggest slice of the pie, and it's also the hardest to measure. But it's absolutely crucial if you want to understand the full picture.
Okay, we've gone through the what and the how. Now let's pull back for the big picture. Let's talk about the why. Why is this one global standard going to change absolutely everything for business and finance?
This right here, this is the headline. If you take away one thing, make it this. Sustainability information is no longer some separate, optional PR thing you find in a glossy report. With these new standards, it becomes a core part of a company's main financial reports. We're talking issued at the same time with the same scrutiny as the balance sheet.
And that connects the dots in a huge way. It means a company can no longer just talk about climate risk. They have to actually think about how that risk could literally change the numbers on their financial statements. Could a new carbon tax mean that a whole fleet of trucks is suddenly worth billions less? Could rising sea levels create massive new liabilities for their coastal properties? You see? This brings climate reporting right into the heart of financial accounting, with very real consequences.
Which really brings us to the final massive question. When you have climate risk and financial performance finally being reported side by side under one global set of rules, you create this whole new era of transparency. So how is that going to reshape everything? Which companies will attract investment? Which business models will even survive? And maybe most importantly, how will this change how we all manage the massive transition ahead of us?
Hey, if you got something out of this deep dive, do us a favor and hit that like button, share it with someone who might find it interesting, and of course, subscribe for more explainers like this. Thanks so much for watching.